What started your adventure into men's groups, and where do you think the value is in men's group in today's society?
Mm. Well, I think there's a lot of value, and I'll get to that. But I think to answer your question, what started me in it was just pain.
Hmm.
I think that, life is painful, and sometimes it's more painful than others. And so when it started to get, and I had just gotten a divorce, and that was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I had two children involved, and I was just terrified of the impact that that was going to have on them. Um, I knew I needed some support. So I had to do some digging and asking around and found, a group. And the Mankind Project is a really great place to start.
Mm.
They're a really well established community of, men, conscious men. Um, and by conscious men, I simply mean men who are willing to uh, uh, be open to self examination.
Mm.
That's how I differentiate that. Right. So which is really the only prerequisite coming into to being part of a men's group is you just have to be willing to look at your own shit.
Yeah.
Um, and if you're not, well, then maybe you just come and you listen and if you get exposed to enough men who are willing to do that, then maybe the value of that starts to become more apparent. Right. So
Mm.
I would encourage any man to get involved in a men's group. I think that it is a long lost tradition among men, probably lost somewhere um, in the industrial age. I'm not sure when it was lost. Maybe it was when agriculture came online and we started living in, vast distances from one another and it became harder to come together as groups. Um, but I believe, and I have just based on what I've read of what human culture was like pre, agrarian, pre farming, that uh, y- men would talk. Right, we would spend time whether it was out hunting together or whether it was out building together, whatever it was that we're doing. I imagine that there was a culture of sharing and communication at that time, and then somehow that got lost. And then men had to suddenly bear this yoke of productive loneliness, right?
Mm.
Of being this care provider, caregiver, um, that meant being this strong lone wolf archetype, and which has been terrible for men. I mean, there's lots of statistics, none of which I remember in this moment, but a lot of statistics that talk about the suicide rates of men and the heart disease, how it affects men more so than it does other identity groups. And this is because of the stress that men are under, tremendous amount of um, loneliness, shame, um, and bitterness ultimately is what evolves as men feel like they're just lost and alone
Mm.
in a world that doesn't care about them. Um, so men's group is a way that begins to write a different story. And not to say that men's groups are the panacea for all men's woes or the woes of the world, and not to say that all men's groups are even good.
Mm.
There's a lot of ways that to really mess up a men's group. Um, so, I want to caveat it with that, right? But where it's the case that you've, got a men's group that is being run by men that know how to do it right, it can be a really powerful technology in fundamentally eradicating shame.
Mm.
Shame is what holds us down. Shame is what isolates us from the rest of our community and our family. And it is the driver of depression and loneliness. And it thrives in isolation. It
Mm.
thrives in sort of, as they say, like shame thrives in the dark, right? And so a men's group is kind of like exposing it to the light. And it's only by exposing what we feel ashamed about in a group of others who are able to hold it compassionately. I remember the first time I was in a men's group, and I admitted to something shameful. I think it was something like um, you know, uh, trying to think about, what it was. It might have been something like um, watched a whole bunch of porn or something. And watching the other men in the group like raise their hand in solidarity, like, yeah, me too. Right. I've done that too. Or sharing, yeah, I've done that. When I started to see that the things that I was afraid to admit were actually really common, that other men have experienced it, or even in the case where it wasn't common, right? It was like these are still men that were able to see another human that like they could say, yeah, I've done stupid shit, or I've made mistakes too. I've never made that mistake,
Mm.
but I've made plenty of others. And the fact that you're sitting here in this circle owning up to it is worthy of my respect.
Mm.
And so you get it, and then and there's something about having that experience as a man that allows us to that shame becomes less strong,
Mm.
becomes less of a grip. It starts to loosen up. We start to feel our soul again. We start to feel a little lighter, start to feel more capable of expressing ourselves, more deserving of the life that we want. And we start to behave in ways that start to drive the creation of that life we want.
Mm.
And it's really complex, and it's nothing that um, I would ever expect a man to be able to see the value of from day one.
Mm.
Like, that's why I don't try to really try to hard sell any man on a men's group. Um, Typically, what puts men into a men's group is pain. Like
Mm.
they just that they're tired of whatever experience they're having, and they're ready to try just about anything to get out of it. And then you're like, hey, well, this has worked not just for me, but it's worked for a whole bunch of other men. Why not give it a shot? And police officers and firemen and the military and all these organizations that have to deal with trauma are are waking up to it. And you're starting to see these same groups happening in these other organizations, and for good reason. I mean, it works. It opens us up, eradicates shame, and helps us start to reclaim our soul.